Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times. Hello, and welcome back to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. We have taken a little break. It has been a little while because we've just been so busy at events. But Tom, Francis, how are you guys doing this week?
Doing very, very well. The sun is finally shining here in the UK, so it's a good time. You know, it's always nice when the summer's returning. And like you said, we've been to a lot of events the past 3 or 4 weeks. It's been a very busy period for us, as it always is. And I think we've got some great insights from those events to share today.
Absolutely. And Francis, how are you doing?
Well, as much as I'd like to, it is very nice outside, I agree. But it might be too nice because I'm feeling the effects of hay fever right now. So I apologise if I sound a little bit under the weather or a little bit, just a bit groggy. That would be why. But yeah, no, the events that we've been to have been really, really good. And there was a lot of really good insights. And I'm looking forward to sort of sharing those today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we wanted to do something a little bit different today because we've taken this little break and we're easing back into the podcast life. We wanted to talk about the events that we've been to and kind of some of the insights that we've learned and just generally sort of the things you pick up. Because, I mean, as obviously you guys will know and everyone who's listening who's ever been to one of these events, they are so wide-ranging in the kind of things that you learn. And, like, there's just so much information coming at you from, like, panels, from people you speak to, and just generally being there. So that's what we're going to do today. And so, obviously, because it's been quite a jam-packed couple of weeks in terms of events, I guess it makes sense for us to just start at the very beginning. So the first one was back in the beginning of June, which was Money20 Europe in Amsterdam, which me and Tom, we went to, which was a crazy week, basically, wasn't it? It was just so intense. I've never walked more than when we went to Money20.
It's a huge event, and yeah, like you said, you get your steps in easily. But it was my first time at Money 2020, and it's good to see just how big it is and all the cool stuff that they have going on there. It's a really good experience.
Yes, I was very excited for you to experience it all for the first time because I remember it was my third time, so I'm a bit old hat now, but when I went for the first time, it was just like, oh my God, this is insane, because they really do try and make it as cool and as interesting as possible. But I mean, is there anything, as your sort of first timer, is there any sort of major things that stood out to you in terms of like panels or things that you heard while you were there?
To be fair, there's so much. I don't know about where to condense it down. I mean, just the size of it to begin with is so huge. And like you said, there's so many cool things going on. They've got the Money Beach there. They've got so many different like little sort of things that you can interact with, little mini games, different stands. You've got so many different food options. You've got guys hand out ice cream, doing little tricks with the ice cream. It's just a really fun experience, while you're getting to sort of review all the panels. And obviously the content there, panel wise, is so interesting. There's so much to explore, and there's so much interesting things that it's difficult to even find one place to start. But I think there were a lot of really interesting kind of panels. One that obviously stuck out to me was the former French president, Francois Hollande, who sat down on the exchange stage. And he was basically just discussing how, he was trying to impact fintech in France. And he was talking about, his most proud moments, how he created a public bank to support emerging technologies and entrepreneurs. And he also spoke about, France's current sort of strategy. It's obviously an area that's becoming a rapidly sort of growing fintech hub. One thing that definitely stuck out to me was the host asked him whether Macron's aim to ensure there are 100 French fintechs by 2030 was achievable. And he basically said, the problem with all presidents' promises is that we don't see the results until long after they've departed. But yeah, no, very insightful. And there were some great panels. But what about you? Did anything pique your interest?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I have to be a completely self-plugging plugger because I did a panel. I went on stage at Money 2020. I'm very fortunate to have moderated a couple of panels every time I've been to Money 2020, which has been so much fun. And today I got to do, back in June, I got to do one about the biggest trends in the payment space, which was really fun with some great people from the industry. And I think it was such an interesting panel because they kind of didn't go in the way that I expected them to go. I thought we were going to end up kind of talking about, things like maybe like CBDCs or something like that, like the really trendy kind of stuff, or like the sort of the new, moving into the new kind of BNPL kind of system that we're getting into. But it was kind of more focused, sort of, I'd say, in two kind of main camps. And the first one was very much stablecoins, and kind of what stablecoins will do to the payment space, specifically thinking about sort of cross-border payments as well, how they can help make them securer and help make them faster and just generally a better experience for consumers. Then another thing that we also talked about was kind of fraud, essentially, as the kind of the future of the payment space really needs to tackle fraud prevention in like just a crazy way, because obviously, as we've kind of talked about a lot before, fraud is just insane right now, and the way that fraudsters can evolve with the industry is quite interesting. And I think one of the things that was said by one of my panelists, who was Rebecca Moody from Darwinium, she was sort of basically talking about preventative measures and making fraudsters change tactics, and saying, how banks are doing a really great job educating their consumers about sort of the warning signs of fraud, particularly when we think about friendly fraud or APP fraud and things like that. But actually, it needs to, really just get into a higher volume and start really protecting people, because it's just getting so advanced. And so that was a really great panel for me to be involved with. I really enjoyed it. But actually, one of the ones that I really enjoyed listening to and feel like I learned a lot on was one about CBDCs and whether or not CBDCs are kind of useful in the space, and what kind of the future for them are. And I thought it was really interesting, because it's something I've been kind of looking into a little bit myself at the moment, in terms of what actually are the applications of CBDCs, how is the different pilot programs going all over the world and things like that. And I think I wrote an article for it, actually, for one of the editions of the Fintech Times newspaper was it a couple of months ago? I can't remember. It wasn't that long ago. So yeah, it was really interesting. I think a lot of the things discussed there was that no one really is that bothered about CBDCs. At least that felt like quite a big argument, that they're all great and they're really cool and it's great that they're happening, but no one seems to actually really care about them. And why are we sort of following through with creating them and putting all the effort into creating them, when actually, and even the ones that are being piloted at the moment, no, the uptake is pretty low. So why are we doing it? So I thought that was a really interesting panel to kind of go away and chew on a little bit. But yeah, I mean, like you say, Tom, it was just like a really interesting, insightful week. And then, of course, we spoke to loads of people as well in interviews, like one-on-one interviews, which was great. You met that footballer guy whose name escapes me, but I know he was important because there was a big queue of people around him. So yeah, it was just, what was his name?
Dirk Kuyt. He
Yeah,
got
that
a
guy.
very big following. Yeah, big
That
crowd. People harassing him for signatures, me included. But it was good fun. And we mustn't forget as well that Editor Claire was on stage as well, moderating a panel of her own. And you guys were really knocking the nature stage out of the park and smashing it.
Yes, her panel was also fantastic, and it's just fun to get to do these kind of things. It does make it makes a difference in terms of like your day to day kind of vibe. But I mean, Francis, obviously you weren't there, but you saw all our coverage of it. How did it look? Good to you? Will we get you there next year?
I mean, absolutely. It looked really, really interesting, and just hearing about everything that really went from you guys, from what I've seen on LinkedIn as well, it definitely seemed so far it's probably one of the biggest events of the year so far. I mean, Money2020 is always sort of a flagship conference for fintech in general, but it definitely did give off that vibe again this year. And it was really cool just to sort of see the update, see how your panel went, as Tom mentioned as well, seeing how Claire's panel went. It was all really cool, and it's definitely something that is on my to-do list now. It's definitely attend Money2020 Europe for sure.
Epic. So, okay, that was one of the things that we went to. The second thing that I think was the main one was Fintech Fringe, of course, which was last week. I think, was it Monday, Tuesday?
That is correct. So
yeah, how did that go?
Yeah, that was a 4-day event, I believe. And unfortunately, we weren't able to make the first day or the last day. However, Tom and I were both able to attend days 2 and 3. And firstly, Fintech Fringe was very different to Money2020 in terms of size and in terms of sort of everything else. It was definitely a different event in the sense of like what it was setting out to achieve. Whereas Money2020, I think, is looking to bring everyone together and, really create this. I'm trying to think of the right word, but for some reason unanimous has come into my head, but I don't think that's the right word. But just for everyone to really sort of come and sort of see and share their insights. Whereas I think Fintech Fringe was definitely a lot more targeted this year, in the sense that on my day especially, there was a focus on growth and scalability within the fintech industry, and a lot of the panels were very much directed in that way. And it was a really, really good and enjoyable experience. It was held at level 39 in Canary Wharf, and it was just a really nice event. It was a lovely event. The food and the coffee that was there was just top tier. Really, really enjoyed it. And it just really complemented the panels that were being held and sort of the discussions and keynotes. There was some really interesting ideas on how to sort of pivot products to supercharge sales, and sort of how organizations need to balance growth and profitability. So in one of the panels on growth and profitability, we heard from Michael Treacy, the head of marketing at OpenPaid, and he explained that one of the only roles as a leader within a business is to be able to prioritize things. And he said that prioritization comes with assessing what's happening around you within the business and the external parts of your industry. And if you try to take on too many things at once, then you're not executing well on the core proposition of the business. And that's really sort of was the topic and theme of the day, was, how to really make sure that, objectives are being met by the company, and how that leaders can play a certain role in helping sort of identify what needs to be done in the marketing department, what needs to be done sort of from the top downwards. And it was I want to say it was different to other events that we've been to, in the sense that, it wasn't looking to make this whole, we've got payments, we've got crypto, we've got diversity, we've got, insurance regulation. It wasn't like that. It was very sort of targeted, and I really enjoyed it. And I think that sort of idea really passed on to day 3 as well. Tom, if you want to sort of explain how you found the event.
Yeah, like you said, it was a much smaller event, but I really liked the way it was set out, the way it was very targeted. They knew what they wanted to achieve. They knew what topic areas they wanted to really hit. And I went to the Thought Machine HQ for the next day to listen on the Fintech Fringe Tech track, where the panels were basically all focused on how they can utilize tech to enable fintechs to scale up and thrive even more. And there were just like a number of quotes that really stood out to me. Travers Clark Walker, who's the founder and CMO of Thought Machine, was kicking things off, and he was explained that the most important thing to consider is that it's one thing to have great technology, but you must build a great organization around it to serve that technology to the industry successfully. And he basically explained it's as much about building the organization around the tech as it is the tech itself. And that was kind of a theme that continued throughout the morning. I remember Andrew McKibben, the head of international technology and operations at the Bank of America, explained that, all of banking is built on trust. And while all these new clients that he speaks to want new innovations and new capabilities, the main thing to focus on always should be reliability, resiliency, and secure technology. And he said when companies remember that, those pain points don't emerge. And, like I said, this is something that kept coming up, people explaining that getting the fundamentals right is so, so important, because, when you're in banking or finance in any sort of way, the keeping the trust of consumers is so important. It's the most important thing. And a lot of places, especially now with sort of the, not introduction, but the sort of hype surrounding AI, everyone's trying to get maybe shoehorn sometimes AI into their operations. And they're basically warning that that's not necessarily the way to go about it, because there's so much that can go wrong if you keep, or you don't prioritize even your sort of fundamentals, and you're not keeping an eye on the main things. And one more sort of quick story that I wanted to share was from Lee Provost, the CTO of Flagstone, who explained that as his first job as a Java developer, he was working on a database, he made his changes and logged off, very pleased with himself for doing a job well done, until panic phone calls came in. And, it turned out that he didn't click log off when he finished. He accidentally clicked shut down, which shut down the whole system, the whole database, and ended up being a very expensive lesson for the bank that he worked for, but a good one for him. And, he used that story to explain that, when horror stories happen, it's usually because the company or the processes allowed the mistake to happen. They didn't consider that could be a thing in the first place. And they basically turned around and said, we probably shouldn't have given a low-level developer access to the shutdown button in the first place. But it's so interesting to see how, even the biggest financial firms can make these simple mistakes. And that was just a theme that I found really interesting. And it was a key takeaway for me, just because it's such an important, message that everyone was making sure. That was the one thing to reiterate, is there's so much good technology that you can utilize. But if you, take your eye off the sort of key fundamentals, then they're going to lose track and you're going to have so many pain points. And all in all, yeah, I think it was just a great event. And I really enjoyed the whole aspect. It was only one morning that I went to, but it was I had so many takeaways from it. And sometimes you can go to an event for 1 or 2 days and have less takeaways. So yeah, the content was great, and another great event to have been to.
I think as well, it's worth noting that this is only its second year. Fintech Fringe last year was its debut to the world, and just to sort of really take on everything that it learned from the first time. And this is only its second iteration, but the fact that you and I both found it so insightful and that there were so many good takeaways, really, I think gives credit to the Fintech Fringe team and what they've done. And I'm looking forward to what they do next year as well. Holly, did you find anything like? You've obviously been to loads of events like this as well. The smaller ones that are much more targeted. How do you find like that they're different to the big ones like Money 2020? Like for us, I think it helps when you have good insights. That's for sure. But I mean, if you don't have those insights and then this sort of the fun side of things aren't there as well, then I guess it's sort of a recipe for disaster.
No, I agree with everything you've said. I think sometimes the smaller ones can just be so much more interesting in a lot of ways and a lot more valuable. And it's the small events like this that make me wish that I did live in London, because they're the ones that you can just like pop in for the evening, for the morning, get like your insights and then go, and it's great, rather than making a whole big sort of production out of it. So no, it's these ones. I've been to lots of similar ones, and it's because it's so concentrated, it is just so valuable to you. And I think because it's a smaller audience as well, I tend to find that when there's sort of less people in the audience for the panelists to like be speaking to, they seem to be a little bit more open, a little bit more easygoing with kind of things that they're saying. So I think they tend to say a lot more than they would perhaps on a stage with like 500 people in the audience, because obviously that can be quite daunting. But as well, I think it's just, yeah, I love these little events and things like that. Not to say little in like in a mean way, but just I think they're just so great, because sometimes you go to these big ones and you kind of have to pick. You have to like pick between going to the panels or going to see the things or going to the booths. Like you never have time to do it all. So yeah, big fan of things like this. So hopefully next year I'll come along to it.
Yeah, for sure. It was a lot of fun. And, last week was London Tech Week as well. And we round out our sort of experience at events and visiting events with Fintech Week London, which is something that we've gone to every year since its inaugural event, which was 4 years ago, I want to say. Anyone can confirm that?
It was in 2021.
Was it 3? Oh, okay. But yeah, so I mean, once again we were back and we were at the Park Plaza in Victoria. The event was really nice. It was at first there was only one stage and then it split off into two, and we were able to really sort of capture all the insights. We had a few members of the team there, and it was a really enjoyable event. And it called Fintech Week London. Of course, there was a big focus on London, and that was how the event really started out. We had a few opening keynotes. From, well, particularly ones that I quite liked were from Howard Dorber, the Deputy Mayor of Business and Growth from the Greater London Authority. And he sort of opened things up and sort of explaining how London is such a pivotal point for innovation and how it really does reflect on the rest of the fintech industry across the globe as well. And he made quite an interesting analogy to, I think it was his grandfather, he said, who was a computer engineer of some kind. But he started doing it when it wasn't really possible. People didn't really know that you could have sort of private computers in your own home and stuff like that. And he was sort of helping integrate and like build them. And he said by the time that when he started his career, nobody knew what his title was. And by the time he ended his career, nobody knew what his title was, because everybody knew what private computers were and everyone had them, to the point that you didn't need an engineer to really come to install them anymore. But he was talking about how quickly these sectors can grow and really develop. And he made that analogy about London and how it's constantly evolving and, really leading the way for fintech. And he said, London is a place of innovation and a place where people adapt, where we try things out. Bringing different technologies together to solve problems gives London a huge competitive advantage and creates a global stage for companies to disrupt and improve the financial services industry. Our strength in financial services in London lays the foundation for a very successful and thriving fintech industry. And we had a couple more keynotes that followed, one from Chris Holmes as well, which really reinforced that idea that, London is leading the way and that others are following suit. And in fact, later on in the day, we also had a panel about data risk and fraud, which saw Karen Zhang, the fintech lead on VC partnerships at Google, and Zara Shah, the board advisor, technology advisor panel, senior board advisor, and co-founder investor of Nexa Quanta, talk to Gina Clark, the Europe content director at Money20 about risk, data, and fraud. And what Shah said was that the MENA region has looked to Europe for regulatory guidance, well, Europe and London, I should say, and they're still behind a couple of the privacy regulations in the MENA region. However, she said, I think that's exactly what is going to happen with DORA and the AI Act too. The region will look to Europe, see how it's being adapted and implemented before it does so itself. And I just think that really reflects, we hear how people are saying from London, saying, this is why London is so great. And then we're also hearing sort of how other regions are responding to London and Europe and how they are really, supporting that case that London and Europe are these front runners in the fintech industry. And I just thought it was a really interesting, topic and panel, and just really cool to be a part of, really, when you think about that. We are in London, we are in this thriving community, and it's really cool to see what happens next.
I think my sort of key takeaway, I was on sort of attached to one of the stages because I was emceeing on stage A. But one of my key takeaways from that was kind of the opposite of kind of the potential of fintech outside of London in the UK. And there was one panel in particular that I sort of remembered a couple of quotes from, which was hosted by Julia Streets. And the panelists were discussing the challenge of making the size of potential of fintech outside of London known to, on a global stage, basically. So Sarah Konchansky, who's the CEO of Fintech Wales, explained that, it's amazing how many people don't know where Wales is. And she said that one of her biggest aims is to put Wales on a global stage. And it's all about getting the reputation of Wales out there and helping people understand, what they're doing in Wales and the potential of it. And I think, that's just such an interesting thing. You think, when we're based in London, you go, oh, well, we know what kind of potential and what these great fintech hubs offer outside of London, especially, us, we work with the news of those regions all the time. And yet when they're going out and trying to secure investment for that region, they're being met with questions of, well, where even is Wales? I don't know where that is. Like, it's crazy to see, the amount of work basically that they're faced with. And one stat that I also took away was from Joe Roche, the general manager at Fintech North. And he explained that if the Northern Powerhouse, as it used to be known, was an EU economy, it would be the 9th largest in Europe and one of the top 25 economies across the globe. And, I just thought that was, such a great stat, really, like the powerhouse of the North. And yet, even now, they're struggling to secure investment in, comparison to London. And it just goes to show, the size of them already, and it's still so difficult. And it was just good to hear the sort of initiatives that these sort of organizations are undertaking in order to make sure that they can better those regions. And I just thought, for an event being Fintech Week London, I feel like, actually one of my biggest takeaways was what's happening outside London and the potential of that. So, but all in all, it was a great event to be a part of. And we're looking forward to next year's one of Fintech Week London as well. But with that, shall we move on to our final segment of the show?
Absolutely. So it has been a crazy couple of weeks for us, really, but I guess hopefully getting back to normal soon, business as usual here at the Fintech Times with all the news and insights. If you want to hear any more from kind of what we've spoken about at these events, we do have some fabulous little roundups and rundowns of everything that happened that you might have missed at Money20, Fintech Fringe and Fintech Week London. And there will be some video content at some point as well, which is really exciting from Money20 at least. So I think, let's move on to what I learned this week. So as we've said, we've learned so much over the past couple of weeks. We always learn so much being on the editorial team at the Fintech Times that we thought we'd like to share that with our listeners. So Tom, what have you learned this week?
This week, one of the things that stood out to me was new research by Tink, which found that 57% of banking executives in the UK believe that attracting young consumers is the biggest challenge that they're facing in the next 12 months. And I just thought that was an interesting stat I wanted to share.
Very interesting. Francis, what have you learnt this week?
So, in keeping with our monthly theme of DE&I, I learned that EconPay has showed its desire to support greater inclusion as it has partnered with Project Nemo, who we've heard a lot about lately, the initiative which looks to work with disability champions and service providers to educate the world on how the financial industry can be more inclusive. And yeah, I just thought it was really cool to see how EconPay is really supporting it, Project Nemo, through its content design to sponsorships and more. Yeah, really cool.
Fantastic stuff. Love that. And then what I learned this week is that the Payments Association has released a new white paper highlighting the urgent need to improve access to affordable financial services in the UK and how to address financial inclusion. And within that, they kind of really outline the potential of community finance options like credit unions. And I just thought that was a really interesting take on the financial inclusion issue and something that obviously that we've spoken about quite a lot here. So definitely worth a read if you are interested in that kind of thing. But anyway, guys, at the end of our podcast, I feel like we were all right, even though we've taken a bit of a break. We did okay. We managed. But thank you so much for joining me again. Hopefully, as I said, we'll be back to business as usual with the podcast and we'll be, kicking it out with all the latest news and insights. But for now, I will catch you guys on the next one.
See you guys later.
See you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversation using #TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.